Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. As the sun dips below the tree line and the night sky takes over, a quiet but critical process begins above our heads. Tiny silhouettes flit through the dark, weaving between branches and barn rafters, doing the work of 1,000 pesticides. Silently, efficiently, and for free. These are Pennsylvania's bats, and despite their bad reputation in folklore and films, they're some of the hardest working and most misunderstood members of our ecosystem. Bats matter more than most people realize. From forest canopies to farmlands, these nocturnal mammals play a critical role in keeping our environment balanced. They eat thousands of insects every night: mosquitoes, moths, beetles, and other crop-damaging pests, saving farmers millions of dollars and helping reduce the need for chemical pesticides. While bats may be stealthy in the sky, their struggles are becoming increasingly visible on the ground. Populations have plummeted in recent years due to threats like habitat loss, climate change, and perhaps most devastating of all, white nose syndrome, a deadly fungal disease that's wiped out entire colonies across the Northeast. Though these creatures are vital, there aren't a ton of local people and organizations working to protect these essential creatures in Pennsylvania. There are even fewer helping bats that have been injured or impacted. That's where Pennsylvania Bat Conservation and Rehabilitation steps in. They provide rescue and rehabilitation support for bats that are brought into their facility. Their staff and volunteers have committed much of their lives to helping reintroduce bats back into the wild. Once reintroduced, these bats can continue their incredible work in nature. But caring for bats can be a difficult and costly endeavor. There are few grants available, and finding volunteers to help with such misunderstood creatures can be challenging. So that means we must do whatever we can to help Pennsylvania Bat Conservation and Rehabilitation. Donations, sponsorships, volunteers, anything we can do to help. In fact, I'm pledging a $100 donation to the organization to help with their important work. This money comes from podcast sticker and magnet purchases listeners have made over the last couple of years. So please, do what you can. I'm excited to welcome Stephanie Stronczyk to the podcast. Stephanie is the founder and director of Pennsylvania Bat Conservation and Rehabilitation. Steph, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by telling us about the work that you do in bat conservation and rehabilitation here in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, our organization is a little bit different than most other organizations. So we are licensed through the Game Commission and the USDA to rehabilitate native bat species. But on top of that, we are also partnering with Bat World Sanctuary to offer a safe place for bats to be retired if they're from zoos or aquariums, if they're confiscated from the illegal pet trade, things like that. And on top of that, we also do a lot of research to better understand our native species and emerging diseases and things like that that are in our natural populations of wildlife.
Why are bats important to Pennsylvania's ecosystems, and what roles do they play that people might not realize?
Our bats are very beneficial. So there's over 1,400 species of bats worldwide. We have 9 species here in PA. They're all insectivorous. And so they eat copious amounts of pests, mostly agricultural and forest pests. And so they're the only flying mammal. They're the only true flying mammal. And so they expend a lot of energy being a flying mammal. So they have to replenish those energy losses by consuming an abundance of insects. So our bats keep our environment healthy.
What are the biggest threats facing bat populations in Pennsylvania today?
We have the most prevalent is white nose syndrome. So it's caused by a fungus, a non-native fungus called Pseudogymnocosis destructans. And that was accidentally introduced in upstate New York in 2006 and has basically caused a severe decline in bat populations throughout North America. And in Pennsylvania, we have lost a lot of our bats. Some of the other threats are habitat destruction, overuse of chemicals like pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, and wind turbines, along with buildings. So some of our migratory bats actually collide with windows. So it's very similar to birds, but most of them thankfully survive.
What are some of the most common reasons bats are brought in for rehabilitation?
Most of the time, we get bats that are grounded for one reason or another. Again, they're a flying mammal, but they're not flawless. They will fly in winds and rain, not severe rain and not severe winds, but sometimes they will get caught in a storm, especially during the warmer months. Migration is hard. Fall and spring migration is hard, especially for first time migrating bat species. So they will expend a lot of energy and become dehydrated or emaciated and just stop flying and hang on the side of a building. They might be found on the ground. Very few bats actually contract rabies. So for the most part, our bat populations are very healthy when it comes to rabies. And so very few bats are actually suspected rabies that come into our care. We get cat-caught bats. So we always encourage people to keep their cats indoors.
How far are these bats migrating?
Migration can be as few as a few miles, or it could be, hundreds of miles. During a survey, we occasionally accompany our Pennsylvania Game Commission biologists on survey work locally. And the one year they banded an Indiana bat, and I believe that following winter there were surveys and it was found, I want to say in Kansas, but I can't, don't quote me on that. It was found much further away than Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Hmm.
Okay, so it does vary.
Yeah. It varies on individual and species.
What does the process of rehabilitating an injured or orphan bat look like from intake to release?
It could be as simple as a few days in care, just getting body weight up and hydration stabilized, or it could be a few months to a year, depending on is it fractures or head trauma, wing tears. We get bats with wing tears, um, and things like that. It's not a death sentence. It just means that they need a little bit extra care, and a longer stay with us.
Can you share a memorable or particularly rewarding bat rehabilitation story?
Oh, we have so many. Um, Oh boy. Well, the most recent, or I should say, this past March, we received a tricolor bat, which is a state endangered bat and pending federal endangerment. They're very small species, and she came into care and she had a protozoan infection, which is a single-celled organism, and that kind of infection can kill animals, especially of that size. And she was basically dying when she came into care. She also had mild white nose syndrome infection, and she completely healed with our treatment protocol. And she was released, um, I want to say May 17th or something. So she was released and she's back out in the wild and she was pregnant when she got released. So that's exciting because bats are weird. They only give birth to 1 to 2 babies a year, and that's it. They're not like rodents. They're not even in the rodent family. They're so vastly different.
What is it you love about bats?
Oh, what don't I love about bats? Um, their personalities. I love their personalities. I love working with any species that people really just kind of either don't understand or they're afraid of because our fears tend to be something that kind of sticks with us for our life sometimes, or at least it's something that is constantly in the back of our mind. And I feel that it's harder for people to get over their fears than anything else. And so we are really trying to educate people on the importance of bats and why we shouldn't fear them. It's a very long-standing misconception.
What are the numbers like of bats that you're rehabilitating on a monthly or daily, yearly kind of time span?
2024 and 2025 have been a very challenging year. This past winter, normally on winters, bats are either they migrated south for the winter, and are just hanging out there until it gets warmer and further north, or they are hibernating. And unfortunately, this past winter has not been kind to us or the bats. And so we didn't get a break. We ended up with 180 bats at the beginning of spring.
Oh, wow.
We are down, I think we released probably about 80 of them. So we have a little bit way to go yet. Uh, and it's been challenging. So we can have 100 bats at any time. We prefer not to, but unfortunately they need our help.
What kind of facility are you operating out of to be able to house this many that are just coming in so quickly?
We undertook a very long, extensive expansion project over the last 2 years, which started in 2023. And thankfully, with our generous supporters, and donors and things like that, we were able to secure the funds to expand. So our facility is on site where I live because rehab is, for the most part, a 24-hour dedication. That doesn't mean that I'm going to answer the phone at 2 a.m. But it is a really important dedication where I can't really be off site. So we have our main ICU, a reception area, our education bat room where all of our education bats are, our hibernation or holdover area, and then we have the fruit bat flight enclosure.
Do you take bats from all over Pennsylvania or right where you're located?
So we this past year have serviced 29 counties. We try to work with other organizations within Pennsylvania that also have the permits to rehabilitate rabies vector species, and try to get them to be able to help bats as well at their facilities. So we do, but we also work with other organizations. We are the only specialized organization in Pennsylvania for bats. So other organizations may take them, but we specialize.
So let's move from rehabilitation to conservation. What are some of the research or monitoring programs that are helping people understand and support bats better?
There is a monitoring program called the Appalachian Bat Count, which really helps biologists identify either new roosts or if a maternity, it's basically for maternity roosting season, which is May through August, depending on the species. And basically, members of the public can, if they know where our site is or if they have bats on their property, they can count the bats, and into some capacity try to identify them. But that information is given to the Game Commission where they monitor those populations and they monitor those sites. And if there is a site, for instance, we had a site last year, a new little brown bat maternity site, which is a big deal because that's a species that was severely impacted by white nose syndrome. So that site was monitored and is continuing to be monitored by the Game Commission. So they're just interested in, understanding a little bit better the population sizes and the abundance of certain species.
We've spoken about it so far a couple times. White nose syndrome has had a huge impact on bats. Can you explain what it is and how it affects local species?
Yeah, white nose syndrome, the fungus Pseudogymnocosis destructans interferes with bats that hibernate. So when bats, they're very unique. They're in the superorder Larasiotheria, which is a classification of very unique animals like giraffes and things like that. And so bats, one of their adaptabilities, in the response to lack of water and lack of food, which in this case is insects, is they either migrate or they hibernate. And so hibernation is a very strategic, delicate process in which the bats, over a short amount of time, pack on body weight. And then they go into hibernation and sleep. And during that hibernation, they're hibernating at about like 52, 55 degrees. So it's not cold. It's not super cold because they're a mammal. They can't tolerate below freezing temperatures. So they hibernate at these very specific temperatures and humidity, which is also conducive for the fungus. The fungus grows at that temperature and humidity. And so over time, in a normal situation, the bats would lose fat very slowly. And then by the time they deplete their fat reserves, it's spring and there's insects and they're ready to be on the landscape. But when they encounter white nose syndrome or the fungus, it basically inhibits any unfurred area of the bat, and it's a necrotic kind of fungus, so it causes a lot of necrosis. And there's a lot of issues with white nose syndrome. It's not just the fungus itself, but the fungus is basically, like, I kind of relate it to having really bad sunburn where it itches and it hurts at the same time. So this fungus is causing irritation to the bats. They wake prematurely 2 to 3 times more than they would when they're hibernating, depleting their fat reserves and coming out during the coldest times of the year, which is generally like January, February. We have had white nose syndrome bats as late April. Um, so they come out of hibernation because they've depleted all their fat reserves. They're searching for food and they're severely dehydrated. Anytime you have a fungal infection, you're most likely to have severe dehydration. And basically, these bats are just dying from starvation and dehydration.
And so far, we just don't have anything to be able to deal with treatment.
Bat Conservation International, and I believe it's Oregon State University, have come up with a bit of a promising solution. Um, for wild populations. It's currently being tested, if I'm not mistaken. Our captive treatment works wonders. So we developed a captive treatment protocol a few years ago when we partnered with the Game Commission for white nose syndrome research. And so we've implemented that protocol with other rehabilitators, most recently Vermont, and they had great success and were able to release their bats. So uh, we're hoping to implement that across the Northeast because the Northeast has, similar species, or if not the same species, and a very similar ecoregion. So we have humidity and temperatures very similar and things like that.
And now, let's hear from our sponsors. Join the Keystone Trails Association's Trail Care team to show some love to the trails you love. KTA organizes hands-on stewardship events and training workshops to maintain and expand hiking trails in Pennsylvania. You can find a trail care event near you. Check out KTA's schedule of events online at kta-hike.org. Are you looking for your next adventure? Unlock some of the best landscapes in Pennsylvania with incredibly detailed, highly curated, waterproof trail maps from the folks at Purple Lizard. They create extraordinary maps of Pennsylvania state forests for people who love to explore the outdoors. Find them at your local outfitters, bike shops, and bookstores, or visit purplelizard.com, where your next adventure begins. Pennsylvania's trails are made for adventure, but they don't take care of themselves. Join the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation as they advocate for trail investments, or roll up your sleeves and join a volunteer day. The foundation and its friends groups lend their voice, time, and skills to keep trails maintained, restored, and kept safe for all to enjoy. From weekend warriors to daily explorers, everyone benefits from the hard work of volunteers who care. Ready to make a difference? Get involved at paparksandforests.org and help keep Pennsylvania state parks and forests thriving. Looking for a way to add some local Pennsylvania flair to your space? Check out Sister Sunflowers. They create unique stickers inspired by small local spaces that make your community shine. From quirky caves to hidden local gems, their stickers bring your favorite places to life. Perfect for your laptop, water bottle, or anywhere that needs a little hometown love. For both locals and visitors, there's stickers, magnets, prints, and more celebrating Pennsylvania's most iconic parks and forests. And for the more avid explorers, there's even a hand-drawn poster to keep track of the Pennsylvania state parks and forests that you've been to. Use the code HELLBENDER15 at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Support local, inspire adventure, and decorate with meaning. Only at Sister Sunflowers. Shop now and celebrate the places that make your town special. All right, back to the show. Steph, do we have an understanding of the percentage of population that's been impacted by this? I mean, if we had 5 million bats, are we down to half? I mean, what does it look like because of this?
There's a very broad estimation. It is based on surveys. Caves have lost 90 to 100% of their hibernating species. So the Game Commission biologist, Greg Turner, had mentioned to me that pre-white nose syndrome, there was around, I think, I want to say like 3 million. I don't remember exactly. Don't quote me because this was several years ago and a lot's happened since then. But basically, our little brown populations, they were the most abundant bat species here in PA pre-white nose syndrome, the little browns. They have declined by, I think the estimation is 98%. They are stabilizing, which is great because, again, they were in an abundance. So those are species that were numerous in Pennsylvania and have declined significantly, but they're stabilizing. We are seeing more of them, which is great. And I mean, it's great and it's not great. You don't really want bats to come into care, but the fact that they're on the landscape and they're, stabilizing, they're surviving is wonderful. There was a report several years ago that there was the federally endangered northern long-eared bat populations. Again, they were not abundant. before white nose syndrome. So there was an estimation of 23 remaining in Pennsylvania. So you're at the precipice of extinction.
Yeah, when you hear about these problems, it's so often we've lost 10% of a population, and there's a big uproar, obviously, because that's still important. But when you're hearing 98, 100% out of some of these cases, I mean, that's just devastating.
Yeah, because bats fly, it's really challenging to get a really good estimate of how many are on the landscape and what the population size is. And that's why it's important that we conserve bats. And if you have the ability to install a bat house or provide native habitat for them, we can better serve them. And members of the public can count them and take proactive measures and care about their colonies.
Well, that perfectly leads to the next question, which is how do you work with the public to promote bat friendly practices like installing bat boxes or preserving roosting sites?
Yeah, so it's really important for every species of native wildlife to have native habitat for one reason or another. In particular, bats require, I mean, they do eat a lot of insects, but they eat a lot of diverse insects and certain species of insects during certain times of the year because generally insect life is quite short. And depending on which species we're talking about. So they're eating very specific species. Some of them, like big browns, are more of like garbage disposals. They'll eat pretty much anything. I don't want to say pretty much anything, but they're responsible for eating non-native insects like the emerald ash borer and New Jersey, the Rutgers University did a study and they found spotted lanternfly um, DNA in the guano. So there is evidence of that, but our biggest thing for public education is get rid of your lawns or reduce the size of your lawns. It's not native. It doesn't create a food source for the native insects, which birds and bats rely on. It doesn't help our soils. It doesn't help the permeability of the ground. It doesn't create great waste like when the during the fall season when the leaves fall. That is food and shelter for a lot of different things, including bats. We have an eastern red bat that will hide under leaf litter and even hibernate under leaf litter during the colder times of the year. Reducing and eliminating pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides. Nobody cares about your lawn. They don't care if there's leaves in it in the fall. They don't care if there's crabgrass or dandelions. Like, just stop using chemicals because those chemicals persist and they affect our insect population, which ultimately affects everything else. So I always say, even though I love bats, insects rule the world. And without them and the biodiversity of insects, we lose other populations. And then what to do when you find a bat, don't handle it with bare hands, get it into a secure container. Don't freak out. It's going to be okay. It's just a bat. Um, and then contact a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. Don't Google. Google does not help when it comes to if you have a bat stuck to a glue trap, don't try to remove it. Don't Google how to remove it. There's a lot of processes that are not mentioned, and rehabilitators are not going to publicize their protocols so that your everyday person can feed this animal or treat this animal or things like that. So please reach out to your professionals. This is what they do.
What are some common misconceptions about bats that you often encounter, and how do you address them?
I think rabies is probably one of the bigger things. The incidence of rabies is very low comparative to the population size. Um, I think it was several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, the rabies percentage was 4% in the United States. And so there was over 24,000 bats euthanized. And of that 24,000, that particular year, about 2 or 3% of them tested positive for rabies. So we're euthanizing a vast number of bats, and a very, very small percentage is the test positive for rabies. The other misconception is that they suck your blood or that we have vampire bats here. We don't. Vampire bats are very small. They reside in Latin America. Um, and they're not going to suck your blood or anything like that. Bats are not diseased. They're very clean. I refer to them as flying cats because they're constantly grooming. They don't like to be dirty, and they don't, a healthy bat is going to be nice and fluffy. They are very unique animals and they feel pain. So just like anything else, they feel pain. So when you have a bat in your house, don't whack it with a tennis racket or a broom. Simply open a window or a door if it's the warmer time of the year. If it's colder, give us a call, especially in the winter, because you don't put that bat outside. If it's too cold, it's going to freeze. So that's some of the misconceptions. And I think honestly, if bats were, diurnal, I think people would have a different perception of them.
What does diurnal mean?
Oh, out during the day. Active during the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I found you because of your Instagram page, and I think you do go a long way into just showing how beautiful they are and how wonderful they are and how they should be protected and cared for. And you just look at them, and something I would never think in my entire life is that is adorable. And I think that goes a long way. I think you're doing a great job in kind of breaking those barriers because as somebody who had their own experience when they were as a kid, bat flew in the house, everyone's losing their mind like the great outdoors, the John Candy, and you're putting the thing on the head and you're
Yeah.
trying not to. It's just great to as you get older to realize, oh, okay. I mean, how critical they are to our environment and how important it is that we take care of them.
Yeah, they sustain our existence. There was a shocking publication, I want to say last year, um, how our northeastern bats have impacted human health. And so there was a lot of research that went into, deducing certain things, but um, our bats, because they have declined from white nose syndrome and the insect populations are booming, a lot of them, more so than previous years. Farmers, especially, again, bats are a huge agricultural pest controller along with forested areas. And so when you lose your bats, farmers are using more chemicals. And they directly applied that research and that understanding to the percentage of infant mortality increased by 8%. And it was directly correlated to the lack of our bats over, white nose syndrome has persisted since 2006 in the Northeast. So that's a considerable amount of time. You're talking almost 20 years. So in that 20-year span, our insect populations have increased significantly. And I mean, as far as insect, because I'm saying, plant native, because our insect populations are declining, our agricultural pests are not declining, and our forested pests are not declining. Those are what impacts human health when we have to apply applications of chemicals because of those pests. And so, infant mortality increased by 8%. And if anyone's interested in reading that article, I strongly suggest it.
What gives you hope for the future of bats in Pennsylvania, and what do you think needs to change?
I think the hope that I have is that we have some really amazing state biologists working diligently to conserve our remaining populations. And I think public perception is hopefully changing, and public perception changes the perception of other agencies. For instance, the Game Commission. If we care more about our bats and start talking about it or talking about our endangered species, that can make a difference in perception. And I think the hope that I have is that, we're all going to get old someday, and the younger generations are going to be the stewards of the land. And I hope that they conserve it and protect it the way that we have been trying for many, many years. So I just hope that children need to be outside at some point and um, learn to enjoy their natural environment, or they're not going to take the initiative to protect it.
How can people in Pennsylvania help support your incredible efforts?
So we have programs coming up. You can come hang out with us and learn about bats a lot more in detail. You can, in a few months, we're going to have sponsor and adopt a bat, so you can do that as well. Um, and just following and supporting us on social media. We have an Amazon wish list or any other items that we may need, or donations. Donations go a long way.
Well, just so you know, I will be making a donation after this podcast. So
Thank you.
you will hopefully get a lot more people to get donations because I think what you're doing is really, really important. Like you said about following you, where can people go to learn more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram. It's PA Bat Rehab, Pennsylvania Bat Conservation and Rehabilitation on Facebook. We also have Twitter. Um, and yeah, we're working on our website, so I'm trying not to promote that too much because it's a hot mess right now. So in the future we will have that up and running beautifully. We do design launches like shirts and things like that. So keep an eye out for that. We don't always have shirts available and things like that because we want to gauge interest. And we like to mix it up a lot. So
Steph, thanks so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
absolutely. Thank you.
I want to thank my guest, Stephanie Stronczyk, for joining the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Meta for more information about upcoming episodes. You can support the podcast by buying merch at hemlockstohellbenders.com, or you can click support the show in the podcast description to provide a monthly donation. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.